I say this a lot. I personally think that you can live zero waste anywhere in the world in one aspect or another. Now, technically, I think we should be using the term low waste because zero waste implies that we're sending zero stuff to the landfill and is a little bit more focused on perfection, even though that's impossible. If you want to learn more about what zero waste actually is, you can check out this video up here. But I think you can live zero waste imperfectly no matter where you live in the world. And today I'm going to be giving you some proof, rather some life anecdotes from me. I have lived in 4 US states as well as Japan. So we'll see how some places are a little bit easier, how some places are more eco-friendly than others. But ultimately, I have found ways to reduce my waste no matter where I live. What's important is that we all try a little bit to reduce our waste instead of relying on just a few people to do it perfectly. Hello everyone, it's Emma and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all sorts of things zero waste, focusing on free, easy, and fun ways to live low waste. And this video is for those of you who are like, I don't really know if I can be zero waste, I don't know how to start living zero waste because I don't have access to this and that in my area, or maybe you just don't know where to begin, maybe you don't think there's a place for you in this community. I'm here to prove all of that wrong, that you can begin right here, right now with what you already have in your home, no matter where you live, no matter who you are. The zero waste movement needs every single one of us. You might notice that I talk a little bit fast, and unfortunately, I can't slow down, nor can I cater to everybody's needs, but thankfully, YouTube is very accessible. You can use the gear icon right down here to change the speed to whatever suits your needs. So let's begin where I began in Ohio, actually very close to where I actually am today. And this is where my love of the outdoors really began. So here's some things that we did that were zero waste before the term even really existed. First, we grew a lot of our own food. In the summers, we had a huge garden growing up. We would have sweet corn, greens, tomatoes, peppers, onions, where we also made our own salsa. We canned green beans and learned a lot about food preservation. We also composted a lot of our stuff, not every single piece of food waste, because our house was like probably a good 100 yards, maybe even more from the field where we would actually be dumping the compost. So we didn't compost every single thing because that would be annoying to take it out, but like watermelon rinds, corn husks, like a big bulk amount of food waste, it just made more sense to go chuck it out in the garden than try to shove it into a trash can. I also have 4 siblings, so hand-me-downs were a must to save money, and inherently it saved the planet too. That plus secondhand shopping. We did this at the time to be practical, it saved money, but now shopping secondhand is also trendy and it saves the planet. I mean, it saved the planet before, but now we know it saves the planet. All of this combined, having a big family plus living in the rural countryside, not having access to a store that easily, it was like 30 minutes to the closest store. We used what we had a lot of the time, whether that be for crafts and DIYs, for working in the kitchen, and everything in between. Now, here are some things that really we did not do zero waste. Keep in mind, this is rural Ohio in the early 2000s, the first being recycling. Recycling was absolutely unheard of in this part of Ohio 15-20 years ago. This was also like back in the day when a lot of recycling like cost you money as a consumer. I think a lot of regions will give you free recycling bins. Some places might still make you pay for recycling, but either way, we didn't have free or even paid options for recycling back in the day. And also because we lived so far away from school, from the grocery store, from sports and activities, we did drive a lot. Now, being a big family, we did carpool a lot, and we even carpooled with neighbors and stuff to school, but lots of driving. And then we moved into town. Still in Ohio, but we moved to the city. To town. It was not even a town, it's classified as a village, that's how small it is. The first part of this move that was eco-friendly was moving into a smaller house, because now we don't have to heat and light up a bigger house. It's smaller, it's more practical, and it'll save energy and money. And here we finally had access to recycling, and I was so involved. Recycling has always kind of been my special interest in the zero waste world, and I dove right in. I learned the rules, I made sure my family was recycling correctly, I would take stuff out of the bin if it wasn't supposed to be there. I was a big proponent of recycling correctly and avoiding wish cycling even before I knew what wish cycling was, which you can learn more about in this video. Being in town also meant that we could bike more. Now, we didn't bike a ton. I tried to bike as much as possible, mostly for the exercise aspect of it. Things like the store were closed, school was closed, sports practice was closed, going to a friend's house. It all just made so much more sense on a bike, especially as a teenager who didn't want to spend gas money. We even managed to put up a compost pile and a small garden. And this was before we even knew like the environmental impacts of composting. We did it because we knew it was free fertilizer and we didn't want to stink up our house with old yucky food. These 2 locations were my childhood where I didn't have much say in what was purchased, the actions that we took, and so forth. So let's move on to my adult life where I actually started to make more changes in my life that I actually had control over. First, to Texas. I joined the Air Force right out of high school, and this is where my training was, and now I was officially an adult. I still didn't have much control over my life being a trainee in the Air Force, but here's what I did do. I always opted to eat at the dining facility to use reusable dishes and stuff instead of dining out at like Popeyes or whatever we had access to. I also did this because it was free. In my dorm, I bought one reusable cup, one reusable bowl, one reusable spoon, and I used those in my dorm instead of using disposables. Also, keep in mind, a lot of this stuff that I did early on in my zero waste life, I did this to save money, not necessarily to save waste, but they do go hand in hand. The coolest thing that I did when I was in tech school was start a recycling program, and you can watch the full video on how I did that in this video. But every single day going into the dining facility and seeing all of the cans, particularly all of the aluminum that was ending up in the trash, and thinking, why is this happening? Aluminum is so valuable. Really, there's a way to recycle. And there was one recycling facility out in town, so I found free bins. I set up the bins with signs on the recycling rules, and every single Saturday I sorted recycling and drove to the recycling center. Such a riveting way to spend your weekends when you're 19. But like, I learned so much about recycling, about the landfill system, and I like that this story shows that even if you don't have access to something, you can be the one to start it. Also in Texas, specifically in San Angelo, the tap water was questionable. I don't remember what was wrong with it, but there was heavy advisories to not drink the tap water, but even then, I didn't use bottled water. Instead, I got one of those big like 5-gallon jugs and filled that up at a water dispenser and then used my reusable water bottle as well. And then it was pretty rare for us as students to have cars since we weren't at this training location for very long, but I did have a car. I brought it from Ohio, so being one of the only friends with a car, we did carpool a lot. But I wasn't perfect. Here are some things that I didn't do zero waste perfectly while I was in tech school. The first being that my lunches mostly consisted of protein bars. That's a lot of waste. So I went to basic training with the clothes on my back and not much else. And then I got all my uniform items and all that stuff. And then I get to tech school. And from there, I had no bedding. I had no shampoo and conditioner. I had no toiletries. So I really had to start from scratch, meaning that I couldn't buy the most sustainable option, even if I had access to it. But regardless, I did have to buy a lot of new products, all of which were not very sustainable. A lot of my dorm snacks also came in plastic because we only had a microwave. I didn't really have access to cook much, but when I had to buy things like granola, I would buy the biggest bag as I could. And then living in the middle of nowhere, Texas, I mean the middle of nowhere, the closest city I think was 4 hours away. That meant a lot of driving. Like even if we wanted to just go to the lake for a weekend, it was still quite a distance. And now we're moving again. This time the Air Force sent me to Okinawa, Japan because Dan was already there and we were married, so the Air Force said, you guys can go live together. And this is really where I started to take zero waste living seriously. Texas really inspired me to recycle, but then I get to Okinawa and I see all the trash washing up on the beach and I'm just like, recycling is not gonna fix that, is it? It's gonna be reducing. I need to reduce what I'm consuming and then think about recycling. I was really just thinking, you know, recycling is great, it's gonna save the planet. But no, it's really reducing that's gonna save the planet. But I didn't have a bulk store, I didn't have a yard, and there were a few stores if I need to buy zero waste swaps at, so what could I have done? Here's what I did. First, I used what I had. Glass jars, particularly from things like jam, peanut butter, pickles. I also started making a lot of stuff at home from scratch, like veggie broth, tortillas, butter, milk, croutons, and so much more to reduce packaging. And I did find a way to buy stuff in bulk, meaning I would just buy the biggest option available. I would buy like a 32-ounce bottle of ketchup instead of two 16-ounce bottles of ketchup. It's not anywhere close to perfect, but it does reduce packaging in the long run. And being on a subtropical island, the farmer's market game was so strong. So we went to the farmer's market every single week and got majority of our produce there. Whatever we couldn't find, we would get it on base. Shopping at a farmer's market, of course, supports local farmers, the local economy. It's reducing waste by not having to ship stuff from mainland of Japan or overseas. It's grown right there on the island. It's probably grown naturally. They're pretty focused on like natural living in Japan, even if they don't like market it as that. It also encouraged us to eat more locally as well as try new foods, and it also saved a lot of money. We also still recycled in Japan. Nothing really new to report here for recycling, except for that Japan does recycling so well. They have the consumers sort the recycling, which increases the likelihood of it being recycled, and they will not accept it. They will literally leave it there on the curb if your recycling is not sorted and it's dirty. Now the downside to this is that you do have to sort them in plastic bags, so that sucks. And then as we started to phase out all of our wasteful products, like once we ran out of our bottle of Tide, once we ran out of our tube of Colgate toothpaste, I started to swap for more eco swaps one at a time. I didn't throw everything away and start from scratch. I waited until we ran out of stuff and then started from there. Since we lived on an island, I did have to order all of this stuff online. We also air dried our laundry as much as possible. It was very, very humid there, so we didn't air dry like all of our stuff, but a majority of our stuff. And then we even started a small compost. We didn't have a full yard, so we did have to use a little bin, but I did source everything from, I found all of this materials on the curb. Like this stuff was going to end up in the landfill, and instead I turned it into a compost bin. But some things that we didn't do perfectly in Japan, one being that Japan is extremely plastic obsessed. They love hygiene over there, they love cleanliness, and the best way to do that is with plastic packaging. I'm not even kidding when I say I saw plastic wrapped individual bananas and apples. It was a little ridiculous. So we couldn't be perfect in this department. But yeah, thankfully they are good at recycling, and what they don't recycle, they actually burn and use as energy. And then living on an island meant a lot of flying as well. We did take ferries as much as possible when it came to like local islands and stuff. But for the most part, if we wanted to go to the mainland, if we wanted to go back to the US, we needed to go back to the US. It was a plan. Next step, Las Vegas. We could not have gone to a more different climate and culture. We went from a subtropical island full of very nice, kind, community-oriented people to Las Vegas. Urban sprawl, dirty, busy, dry, hot, loud, bad drivers. And once again, with this moving, we did have access to different things. So we adopted new zero waste swaps. We gave up some zero waste swaps. First, we finally had a bulk store. This was my first time having a bulk store in 2021, after having started living zero waste in 2018. So it took me 3 years to have access to a bulk store, which really is just proof that you can live zero waste without having access to a bulk store. And we started to use it all the time. We no longer had to buy packaged rice, sugar, flour, nuts, raisins, quinoa, and so much more. This helped us reduce a lot of single-use packaging, and if you want to find a bulk store near you, you can try out the EcoRate app. On this app, you can search in your local area and it'll spit out bulk stores for you. Vegas was also the perfect climate for line drying clothes. It was hot, it was dry, there was no humidity, it rarely rained. The only thing is that the sun might bleach your clothes. But I think we used our drying machine only a handful of times we lived there, saving a ton of energy and waste. And since we actually had a small yard in the house that we were renting, we set up compost right away. Composting in Vegas was a little tricky because it was so dry, but it worked out fine. We also furnished our home entirely secondhand, stuff that we needed brand new. We did ship a lot of our stuff from Japan, but everything else that we needed, a compost bin, anything for the kitchen, anything for my office, it was all secondhand. We did this on places like Facebook Marketplace and OfferUp. And we also got some e-bikes so that we could start biking around because the weather in Vegas is just so nice. But that leads us to some downsides to Las Vegas. Las Vegas is very sprawly. So we didn't bike a ton. We did have to drive a lot. Like, you could drive for an hour and still be in Las Vegas going 70 miles an hour, mind you. This isn't even because of traffic. And then since Dan and I also worked on 2 different bases, we did have to have 2 cars and drive 2 separate ways. So that sucked. As well as if you wanted to do anything like outside of the city, you wanted to go to Zion or Joshua Tree or the Hoover Dam or wherever you wanted to go, you did have to drive. The public transportation game in Las Vegas was so bad. And then if you did want to drive to all these places, they're so far away. So lots of driving in Las Vegas. And then last summer, we moved to Spokane, Washington for 6 months. Not only did we move locations, but we also moved into an RV, which brought about its own set of struggles and ways that we could live zero waste differently. In Spokane, we did have access to a bulk store still. Now, it was a little bit farther away, but what we would do is just pair it with, you know, going climbing, going to the store, going on a date, whatever it was. I also really liked that downtown was so small, which meant that we could just go find a free parking lot for our truck, unload our bikes, and then bike around downtown to save energy as well as money. Now, we still composted in the RV, but we couldn't do it traditionally. We did use the Lomi composter machine, which you can check out my full review videos up here. Far from perfect, but in an RV, it's pretty much the only option we would have. And as much as I compost for the planet, I also compost because I hate like my kitchen smelling like food waste. And then living in such a small space, our whole RV would have started to smell from food waste, so I couldn't handle that. We also continued to recycle in the RV, but instead of having curbside pickup for recycling, we did have to sort it ourselves and then transport it to the local recycling center. We had no laundry machines in our RV, so we did have to use a laundromat, which is cool. I love laundromats because they encourage you to borrow from one another, to use the same thing, to not have a bunch of stuff being created from new. But downside to the laundromat, we can't control the temperature of the laundry. We also became a 1-car household when we moved into the RV, mostly because we only needed 1 vehicle to tow the trailer and we didn't have any other way to transport a second vehicle. And we also worked together when we were in Spokane, so that helped us reduce a lot of our driving emissions. And then I think our biggest quest from 2023 was to support family-owned businesses and small businesses. So for example, instead of buying GT's kombucha, which I think is still family-owned, we still went with a smaller local business right there. It was made in Idaho, so it was made pretty close. Instead of buying Sabra hummus, we now buy Cedars hummus, and so forth. And again, the theme, we were nowhere close to perfect living in the RV. As I mentioned with a few other things, like a few of those were give and take, like they were a little bit eco, but they were also a little not eco. Another thing with the RV is, while we did become a 1-car household, our 1 car was a truck. And now we're back in Ohio. So when I wrote this, we were still living with my mom, who lived closer to things like bulk store, had more access when it came to groceries and stuff. And now we're at my dad's house. We're in a more rural part of Ohio. So what are we doing now to still live zero waste? We're still on our quest to support small brands, and that includes grocery stores as well. We like to shop at Meijer instead of Kroger because Meijer is still family owned. And then even inside the grocery store, supporting small local brands. Once again, we don't have access to a bulk store, so we just buy stuff in the largest amount of packaging. So we just buy a giant bag of rice instead of like 3 or 4 small bags of rice, for example. I started making sourdough. They're right here. Do you want to look at them? Here's one I'm getting ready to bake soon. This has been so much fun and so much easier than I thought. And I cannot tell you how much packaging this has saved. We love eating bread. So now not only is our bread plastic free, but all of the different stuff that I make the sourdough discard. So I've made naan, I've made tortillas, cookies, desserts. I've reduced so much packaging by making a lot of baked goods from scratch this year. In the last couple months. And the cons. While we're still a 1-car household, we still just have the 1 truck. This has also become quite annoying because like if Dan is volunteering and I have an appointment, I have to go drop him off, go home, go to my appointment, go home, go pick him up, go home. So like it's probably just as much driving as driving 2 separate cars, potentially even more driving. So 1-car household can be a hindrance when you live somewhere with no access to public transportation. And then of course, now living in rural and suburban areas, it can be quite annoying because it's quite a bit of a drive to go do anything like going out to eat, going to the grocery store and stuff like that. And of course, this is just my one personal experience. I do have experience living in a lot of different places. So I do think I have a good gauge on if you can live zero waste everywhere or not. And I think you can. I hope that you can see how you can live zero waste no matter where you live, potentially low waste, not zero waste. I used to line dry my stuff and now I don't. I used to have access to a bulk store and now I don't. I make bread now when I didn't before. Like there's a lot of give and takes and fluctuating your zero waste life depending on the season of life you're in, depending on if you're moving and stuff like that. And this stuff is just the tip of the iceberg. This isn't even considering stuff like energy conservation, water conservation, using what I already have, being mindful in the grocery store. I just didn't want to be redundant and repeating that all over the place. So I do all that stuff as well, and I have for the last several years. If you want more tips on living zero waste and you don't really know where to start, I recommend checking out my Zero Waste on a Budget series you can check out right here. I have 325 ways to live zero waste totally for free in that series, and I'll leave more resources for you down below, such as energy conservation, water conservation, zero waste swaps for beginners, and more. If you're a zero waste beginner and you don't know where to start, leave your questions down below. I can follow up in the comments and in a future video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this leaves you inspired to live zero waste no matter where you live, and also focus on your small everyday changes. You don't need to focus on the big picture right now. You don't need to focus on throwing everything away and buying all these new swaps. You don't need to be perfect. You can live zero waste right now by simply shutting off the lights that you're not using, shutting off the water when you're not using it, and learning how to recycle correctly, just for an example. Those are some of the easiest things that I think we can do to start living zero waste without having to buy any swaps and without having access to a bulk store. Again, thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with others if you think that they would find any value in it, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember that your small actions make a big difference in the long run. Bye guys. Gosh, I do talk fast, don't I? It is. Be allergic to the countryside. I've been sneezing up a storm. Instead of buying Sabra honey,